Hi, Cox Cougars! My name is Miss Hudson, and I am recording this from my 7th grade language arts classroom at Jean Pike Middle School, but in just a couple months, I get to join the 5th grade team at Cox, and I am so excited. I'm also very excited to read Chapter 7 of Finding Goby to you today. Because it's always important to read with a purpose, I'm going to give you a little heads up about the question I'll ask you at the end of the chapter. How does the author use foreshadowing to build suspense? So remember that foreshadowing is when the author gives you little clues or hints about something that's going to happen later on in the story. So, especially towards the end of the chapter today, how does the author start giving you clues that something's not quite right, that something's going to happen? Okay, here we go. The storm had passed by the next morning, and the organizers got everyone back on the bus to return to the race site. Today was the last day. Dion had studied everyone's times while they'd been at the museum. He was still ranked second, but Tommy was no longer in the lead. His trouble during the long stage had bumped the runner down to 4th place. The Chinese runner Zheng was now in 1st place. He was the one who'd won the long stage, beating Dion's time by 40 minutes. Dion knew there was no catching up to Zheng now, but that was okay. Second was still a really good rank. Third was Brett, the New Zealand runner. He'd been running really well too, and he was the other one who'd beaten Dion at the long stage. But Dion was still ahead of him overall by 20 minutes. As long as he came in before Brett today, he was guaranteed 2nd place. Everyone had been exhausted after the long stage. But they'd all had a full day to rest, and today's race was so short there weren't even any checkpoints. So when they lined up at the start, all the runners looked eager and strong. Dion knew a lot of people were going to sprint the whole way if they could. He was planning on setting a brisk pace as well. Goby was next to him as usual. There was no reason she couldn't run this last race with him, especially since it was cooler today and overcast. Dion wouldn't have to worry about her overheating. The gun sounded and they were off. Dion didn't try to sprint, but he didn't hold back either. Goby stayed right beside him the whole time, matching his pace perfectly. She was such a good runner. Several times Dion stopped to give Goby some water. Each time she drank right from his hand. He was amazed that this scrappy little dog, who had known him less than a week, trusted him that much. And Dion promised himself that he wouldn't let her down. At one point, midway through the race, Dion was giving Goby another drink when a runner approached from behind. It was Brett. Dion sighed to himself. If Brett passed him now and maintained that lead, Dion would lose the 2nd place spot. But instead, Brett stopped beside him. Dion glanced up, and the New Zealander shrugged. "I could hardly run past you as you're giving her a drink, could I?" he said with a smile. Dion smiled back. "Thanks." This was what the race was like, he thought. Most of the time, the runners respected each other and refused to take unfair advantage of situations. Even though each runner was here to win, they were also all in this together. And running for this long and pushing yourself this hard had a way of bringing people together. When Dion stood and tucked the water bottle away, Goby barked and wagged her tail, clearly eager to continue. They began running again, and Brett took up a place just behind them. The 3 of them stayed like that to the finish line. Dion crossed it 5th for the day, and Brett was 6th, with the little dog right between them. They'd done it. The race was over, and Dion had won 2nd place overall. Goby pranced about, and the man laughed. She had known there was something special about today. Everyone had been so excited and had been running so much faster than before. And it had been so short compared to the other days. Now they were back at camp again, and people were laughing and cheering. So was the tall man. There was lots of food, too, and he kept passing her pieces of meat. It was amazing. After the medals and photos came a traditional barbecue. Dion allowed himself to relax and enjoy the evening. The race was over, after all. All his training and discipline had earned him 2nd place, which was really good for someone who'd been running for only a few years and who had taken a break for the past 6 months. He'd worried when he started this race that his time as a runner was over. Now he knew it definitely wasn't, and everyone else knew that too. Let's see. And everyone else knew that too. Coming in second was impressive enough that he'd earned their attention and their respect. He was happy with that. He was also happy with the friends he'd made, like Richard and Mike and Zhang and even Tommy. Every race went the same way for Dion. He started it alone, but ended it surrounded by friends. And this time he had a special one. He smiled and ruffled Gobi's hair. She barked and licked his fingers, enjoying the grease from the kebab. Yes, this race had been different for them, because of her. Now he had to make sure that he changed her life in return, for the better, he hoped. After the barbecue, everyone packed back into buses to go back to the nearest town, Hami. There would be a big awards dinner there that night, and then they would all fly back home, except for Gobi. Because, as much as he wanted to, Dion couldn't simply bring her back to Edinburgh with him. There were all kinds of rules and regulations about transporting animals, especially between different countries. He didn't know what they were, but he knew it wouldn't be quick or easy. Nurali had taken a shine to Gobi during the race and offered to take Gobi home with her until they worked out how they could get her to Dion's home. Once he was back in Edinburgh, Dion could figure out how to get Gobi out there too. But leaving her behind was a lot tougher than he'd expected, especially when he saw her glance up and look around. He knew she had to be looking for him. Gobi had been enjoying the morning so far. Everyone was so friendly and relaxed. There was lots of talking and laughing, and lots of people were offering her food, especially this one lady. Gobi remembered her from the night of the big storm. She hadn't seemed as friendly then, but she was being nice now. Then Gobi heard the bus. What was going on? Were they going somewhere again? She suddenly realized that she didn't know where the tall man was. Where had he gone? She looked around and saw that a lot of the runners were getting onto the buses. Had he gotten on one too? Why hadn't he waited for her? She started running around looking for him, but she couldn't see him anywhere. Dion felt as if his heart were breaking. He could see Gobi running around outside. Her tail was down and her ears were pinned back. She looked intent and concerned, and he knew exactly why. She was trying to find him, and he was up here on a bus, about to leave her behind. He didn't want to go, not without her. He wanted to run back off the bus and scoop her into his arms and take her with him. But he couldn't, not yet. So he just sat there and watched, and pretended that his eyes weren't wet and that he wasn't sniffling over a funny little dog he'd met only a few days ago. As the buses pulled away, the nice woman called to Gobi. She offered her some meat and ruffled the hair on her head. Gobi knew the woman was trying to reassure her, but all she could think was that the tall man was gone. He had left her behind. She lifted her head up and howled. Back in Hami, Dion took a long hot shower. There hadn't been any chance to do that during the race, and like most of the runners, he hadn't brought extra clothes because they would only slow him down. Now he was happy to strip off the yellow running gear, wash away a week's grime and dirt and sand, and put on clean clothes again. Then he went to the restaurant for the awards dinner. He looked everywhere, but didn't see Nurali and Gobi. Finally, he asked one of the organizers where they were. The organizer looked surprised. Nurali was never going to come back here, she answered. She's got too much to do back at the finish line. Dion frowned. Is she coming here at all before we leave tomorrow? He asked. The organizer shook her head. I can't think why she would. That upset him. It meant he wouldn't get a chance to say goodbye to Gobi after all. He'd always meant to do his best to reassure her that he would be back for her, that his leaving was only temporary. What if she thought he'd abandoned her completely? And why had Nurali said she'd see him here if she was never planning on coming to Hami at all? Had he just misunderstood her? Or had she misunderstood him? That was possible. She spoke some English, but it wasn't her first language, and Dion didn't speak any Chinese. He hoped it had just been an honest error. He was still going to bring Gobi home. That night Dion called his wife. It was the first time they'd spoken since he arrived at Urumqi before the race. He was eager to speak to her and to tell her about Gobi. He wasn't entirely sure how she'd react, though, when he said he wanted to bring the little dog to live with them. As soon as she picked up, Lucia asked, "How's Goby?" Dion was shocked. "You know about Goby?" he said. She laughed. He'd always loved her laugh. "Yeah," she replied. "A lot of the other runners have mentioned her in their blogs, and she's even made it into a few official race updates. She's a pretty little thing, isn't she?" Dion relaxed a little. "Yes, she is," he agreed. "I wanted to talk to you about something." But again, Lucia was ahead of him. She'd always been good at knowing what he was thinking. "You're bringing her home?" she asked. "As soon as I heard about her, I knew you'd want to." Dion laughed. "Leave it to his wife to anticipate his plan. That's what I'm hoping," he admitted. "But I'm going to need your help." He already knew that she'd agree. That was one of the things he loved about Lucia. She had always supported him, and he could tell that she already liked Goby, even though the two of them had never met. The next day, Dion took the train from Hami to Urumqi, and then a taxi with Richard from the train station to the airport. He'd fly to Beijing, and from there home to Edinburgh. After a week out in the desert with only the other runners and the race organizers, he'd forgotten just how crowded even a small city like Urumqi could be. It was dizzying, and he didn't help that Dion didn't speak the language, but he managed to get to the airport without any real trouble. On his way to his plane, Dion saw the race organizers also waiting to board. He hurried over to the lead organizer. "Thank you so much for everything," he told her. "The race was amazing, and thank you for helping arrange for Nirali to look after Goby until I can figure out how to get her home." The lead organizer smiled at him. "You're very welcome." Then she handed him her business card. "It's been fantastic to see the story of you and Goby take shape," she said. "If we can make it happen, we will." Settling into his seat and waiting for the flight to take off, Dion told himself that everything would work out. He'd get home, fill out whatever paperwork was necessary, and make arrangements to get Goby brought out to him. Everything was going to be fine. Okay, again, your reflection question is, how does the author start to build suspense through his foreshadowing? How does he start to give you little clues or hints about something that will take place later on in the story? I loved reading to you, and I cannot wait to meet you all in the fall. Have a great summer.